Welcome to another episode of Estate Planning Nightmares and How to Avoid Them. This is the show that highlights the importance of estate planning and why everyone needs to do it. And of course, the unfortunate consequences of what happens far too often if people have not planned. I'm your host, John Braddock, author of Click Here When I Die, and the founder of My Life and Wishes, the Legacy Vault, an online planning and document storage solution created to make things easier for those you love. Today, we have another exciting episode for you, and I am thrilled to introduce my friend, the Legacy Lifeguard, attorney Heidi Thompson. Let me give you a little background on Heidi. Heidi is the owner and sole attorney of Lifeguarding Legacies, which is a concierge firm that does estate planning at her clients' kitchen tables. Heidi spent 15 years in public education as a counselor and behavioral coach prior to entering law practice. Heidi has lived all over the country, and she calls herself a Washing-Flora-Virgi-Texa-Cali-Zonian, which I probably messed up, but she's been in Washington, Florida, Virginia, Texas, California, and now the great state of Arizona. She shared this journey with her husband of 32 years. She has 2 grown children and now 2 grandbabies. Now, Heidi's superpower is taking complex ideas and breaking them down into what she calls 6th grade blog speech. And she is the author of Lifeguard Your Legacy, a book that she published to break down estate planning for Arizona. Now, personally, I love this. Taking something as critical as estate planning and ditching all the legalese and the jargon and making it understandable to those of us who don't have a legal background is brilliant. So welcome to the show, Heidi.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad to be here, John. I've really been looking forward to this one.
I'm excited to have you. It's always great to connect with you. We've known each other probably 3 to 4 years now. You, in fact, were one of the first attorneys and firms to partner with My Life and Wishes and make the Legacy Vault available to your clients.
It was really obvious to me right up front how great that was going to be to have all of the information in one place for clients. I mean, let's face it, we know we're none of us are good at filing, so having one system, it just made a lot of sense to me.
Absolutely, and avoids that ultimate scavenger hunt at the end of the day that our family lived through, and you're protecting your clients. So,
Absolutely.
I love the concierge concept of estate planning. Can you explain why you made the decision to bring the process to your client's kitchen table rather than the model of having them come to an attorney's office that they're all scared to do anyway?
Well, that's almost it. So I did like most new attorneys, and you rent an office space at first when you're getting started. And I went to one of those shared office spaces where they've got the front desk, and that's what a lot of attorneys start out doing. And I started having a couple challenges with some older clients who'd get lost in the building, couldn't find the office, and get frustrated. So that was their first experience. The second problem that we had is, a lot of clients really didn't like to be out there driving. So I had a couple clients who would ask, "Hey, would you come to me?" I started saying, "Well, sure, why not?" So then I started asking clients, "Would you prefer I go to you rather than meet at the office?" And I found almost all the clients were taking me up on it. So finally I said, "Well, then what am I paying for?" I canceled the office and moved to that concierge model. And I did find at the beginning, there were a few people who were like, that doesn't sound like a legitimate lawyer. You don't even have an office location. But it was pretty rare that people had that idea. And then COVID hit. And during COVID, nobody wanted to go to an office. Nobody wanted to be around a lot of people. People were very comfortable with one person in their own home. And my business just kind of took off from there. And nobody questioned it after that when everyone moved to home. So I kind of beat the rush and did it before it was popular.
You're a disruptor. You started a trend before it had to be a trend, right?
Well, it kind of really, everything goes in cycles. There were people doing this 30 years ago when doctors used to go to homes, but it hadn't been in vogue for a long time.
Yeah, certainly. So I always ask another question, obviously, I do what I do. changed a career to build the legacy vault because I'm on a mission to help 1 million families avoid the nightmare that potentially awaits. But I love asking attorneys because, with law, there's as many areas or fields in the law practice as there are makes of automobile out there. So why estate planning over, criminal law or any other practice area?
Well, this one's a little bit of a long story, but I think we got time to go there. So,
Absolutely.
when I went to law school, I really did plan on doing the messy parts of law because I came out of a counseling background. So I was very comfortable on my feet. I was very comfortable in the courtroom. I liked the client messes. And so I had planned on doing divorce, custody, and criminal law. And so when I graduated law school in 2007, I passed the Florida bar and believed I'd be moving back there, which is where I had lived prior to going to law school in Virginia. And, that was 2008 at that point, 7, 8. The economy had kind of just taken a massive nosedive. Nobody was hiring for my husband to be able to make that move to allow me to go hang a shingle. And I really was already old enough that I didn't, and I had kids. I mean, my kids were third and fourth grade when I started law school, and they were middle school when I got out of law school. So, the thought of working in a big firm where you're having to do 80-hour weeks, it just wasn't an option. So I was going to hang a shingle and do my own practice. Well, economy didn't allow it. So we ended up moving to Texas, where my husband could find a job to relocate us at the time out of Virginia, but I hadn't taken the bar there. And you have to practice somewhere for 3 years before you get to take a past bar and transfer it. So I had to take the Texas bar, and I missed the window for that. So I went back into school counseling, which is what I did in Florida before law school, thinking next summer I'll take the Texas bar. Well, at that point, the kids were now, getting ready to start high school. They could be at the school with me. I was starting to get pretty excited about that prospect. And so I stayed a little bit longer in education. Well, life happens. My son decided he wanted to go to Hollywood, so we moved from Texas to California. I definitely wasn't going to take the California bar because I knew I wasn't going to stay there very long. And I didn't want to make a life there. So, I ended up kind of a little in education, a little in Hollywood during that season of my life. Then, when my son decided to go off to college, I didn't need to rent the sunshine in California anymore. We moved back to Washington, where my family's from. And I got this job offer to do a really odd role in behavior, where I got to bring behavior to a school district and kind of run a program. And that was such an exciting, fun challenge for me that I just thought I'd never practice law at that point. Well, my husband's opportunity to work there ended, and because they just closed up shop, and so he had to find a GE opening somewhere else. The sunshine beckoned of Arizona, and so we ended up moving down here. And I realized it was going to be a $30,000 pay cut in Arizona to stay in education. So I thought, well, maybe I'll work on becoming superintendent. And I enrolled in my first class for a doctoral program. So, mind you, at this point now, I've got a bachelor's in psych, a master's in education, a law degree, and now I'm looking at a doctor. Good grief, how ridiculous is all of this? But so I start that program. At the time, I'm attending a law school 10-year reunion. And I go back to this reunion, and one of my friends from law school, Josh Dorsey, I'm going to throw him under the bus, comes up to me, elbows me, and says, "You should be doing what I'm doing." And I said, "What are you doing, Josh?" He goes, "I'm doing estate planning, and I think you'd be great at it." I laughed. I said, "I'd have to take the bar. Josh, I'm a grandma now. I don't need to be taking the bar. That's ridiculous." He goes, "No, you're going to take the bar. You're going to come to Florida for a week. You're going to learn how I do what I'm doing, and you're going to go back and do that in Arizona." And he said it so prophetically and so seriously that it was funny to me. Um, Unfortunately, he said it in front of my husband. So I get back home from this reunion, and my husband is now elbowing me in the ribs and saying, you could do estate planning like Josh. Josh is doing really well at this. I'm like, fine, you know what? I'll look into it. So I actually do a little bit of due diligence, and I'm researching and I'm learning, what is the job of estate planning? Well, the last job I had in education, I was doing seminars. I was teaching a section that most people didn't know anything about, managing behavior. I was analyzing problems and writing plans for how to deal with problems. And then I started analyzing estate planning. You do seminars, you teach people about an area of the law that they're not familiar with. You're analyzing problems and you're writing documents to solve problems. And I realized, oh my heavens, it's the job I just loved, just with a different group of people. So, and I realized it would allow me some of the independence that I was really looking for at this phase in my life, so I can still enjoy my grandkids. It's something I can do by myself as my own business. So, really, I did the stupidest thing you can do in business, which is move somewhere where you know no one to do something you've never done before when you've never run a business. So it was maybe not a business model I'd recommend, but I really do enjoy what I'm doing. I really help people make some great decisions. And I've kind of developed a little bit of a specialty niche with the parents of 20 somethings. And not that I won't serve everybody, but that's become kind of a fun niche for me. So,
And, it's so important that young people do the planning. So many think, oh, I have time and I'm young and I'm immortal and everything else. And no, you've got kids and there's a lot that needs to be thought through.
and
It's interesting.
if you do it right when you're young, you're right when you start having kids, or even before that, if you've got complicated living arrangements, if you do that young, it really isn't very expensive to maintain it later on as life changes.
All our
Um,
young listeners,
it's
chalk that
a
one up.
it's a lot more expensive to wait till later when the prices just keep going up. I mean, my first estate plans were $1,200. They're 3,500 now.
Right.
And
Exactly.
it's not going the other direction anytime soon. So it's wise to start early and then update as you need it throughout your lifetime. It's not going to cost you that much.
Absolutely. And thanks for sharing your why and how you got started.
I know it's a crazy
Yeah,
long story.
no, it's great because Joe is your first domino. So as a mentor of mine, a guy named Joe Polish, who's actually lives here in the Valley, he always refers to, what's your first domino? And you're like, what are you talking about? But if you think about domino, right, and you set them up, it takes the first one that
Yes.
starts a chain reaction that finds your
Yes.
path. And
Absolutely.
sometimes we find that first domino when we're 21 years old. Other times we don't find it till, we're 40 or 50 years old. But it's that one thing that we can link back to and say, what was the first domino that got me onto this path? And Josh is your domino. So
He
he might
definitely
not
is the
like
one
being
that
called a domino, but sorry, Josh.
I don't think he'll mind. My husband's kind of the same way. When we were first married, the job he found was glorified title, but a lot of what he did was dig ditches for a construction company. But he ended up learning some construction planning and all of that while he was finishing a finance degree in business and administration. Well, you know, Disney is what moved us to Florida. He got a job with Disney, and they said what they were looking for was someone who was in finance but understood construction. If he had never taken that gimme job that he really didn't love, he'd have never had that door open. And that same door of Disney is what opened GE, and he does fairly well. So you just never know how the skills of yesterday are going to be needed for the job of tomorrow.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So
Well, hey, the reason I call this show Estate Planning Nightmares is that I've found that the best way to get people thinking about their own planning is through real stories, right? And
right.
not necessarily to scare them, yeah, maybe a little, but not necessarily to scare them, but to get them to understand the realities of what may happen if they don't plan properly.
Right.
And with all years of experience that you've had in helping the families you have, I know you've seen a lot of the good, the bad, and the ugly. And
Yes.
so I always love asking about stories. So you had shared a couple of thoughts with me, and I'd love to key you up for the first one because I love the title. Um, Dirty deeds done cost a fortune. So, can you explain dirty deeds?
Sure. Well, the ACDC, dirty deeds done dirt cheap. Yeah, this is the
Yeah.
opposite of that. So this is a call I had not even that long ago. Man called me and said, well, when his dad died, his mom thought it would be a great idea. And this follows on. I know your last guest talked about do-it-yourself estate planning. And this was an example of that. That's just a perfect follow-on to your last conversation. So mom decided it would be a great idea to take her only son and his wife and put them on her deed for her house so that when she passes, her kids inherit that house from her. She's right. It's nice and clean. It's a super easy way to make them inherit the house. And if one of them is gone, the survivor of them gets the house. It seems perfectly logical until you start to understand a little bit about the tax consequences of that decision. That was a very expensive, dirty deed. By doing that, what she did is she lost, when you die and someone inherits your house, and it was just you on the title, or just your trust on the title, or a beneficiary deed on the title, the person that inherits that house from you, they inherit it for the value that it had at the date of your death. It's called a step up in basis. That step up is a tax term, and it means the difference that it's worth from what you bought it for to what its value is at the time. And so if you bought a house way back in the day, in grandma's case, for 200,000 and now it's worth 800,000, that's a step up of 600,000. And that's significant because now if her son sells that house and he inherited it on her death instead of being on the deed, he's able to take and sell that house for 800,000 and not pay any capital gains on it. It's great.
Right.
It's one of the best things is inheriting a house. Well, unfortunately, by putting the kids on the title, they get her step and basis as if they bought the house with her. So they now inherit the house as if they bought it for 200,000, and if they go to sell it at 800,000, they're going to pay capital gains on 600,000. So that deed they did by themselves for $30 is going to cost them 15% of $600,000. It's about 90 grand. I'm going to say that's dirty deeds done way more expensively than it needs to be. But I'm going to add a little bit of salt to this story because the son thought, wow, mom, that was such a great idea, that he turned around and he put his mom on the deed as a joint tenant with he and his wife.
Oh,
Oh boy. So in Arizona, at least, when you own a property with your spouse, you can own it as community property right of survivorship. And many states have similar things, sometimes under different names. But it's the best kind of ownership because it means you get a double step up in basis. When the first spouse dies, you get a step up to the date of death then. So the first spouse, the surviving spouse, if they decide they want to sell the house, they get that step up to the value when their spouse died and can sell it without any capital gains. And then when the second spouse dies, if they didn't sell it, the kids inherit for that second step up. So it's a double step up. So if he would have done a beneficiary deed to give the house to mom, because they don't have kids, if he'd have made mom the beneficiary deed beneficiary, she'd get a step up in basis on their house if husband and wife died. But instead, by putting mom on the house with the two of them, they got rid of that mid step up in basis. They lost both step ups, and everyone gets the basis that the couple bought it for. So they probably at the end of this mess will save, I'm going to say somewhere in the network of $200,000 by redoing those deeds. But to do that now, they're going to have to do a whole bunch of deeds to fix it. They're going to have to do a disclaimer from both the husband and the wife on mom's house. So that's two deeds of disclaimers. And then mom is going to have to turn around and do a beneficiary deed. So they'll pay three deeds to undo the cost of one. And on the husband and wives, they're going to have to do three more deeds because they're going to have mom disclaim. They're going to have to put it back into community property and accept it as community property. And then they're going to put it in a trust. So, so they're going to pay, if it's 400, depending on what the lawyer charges. Now, in my case, I'm going to be about $300 on each of those deeds. That's 300 times 9. That's $2,700 that they're going to spend that they could have done right the first time for about $600. So there you go.
Yeah. Or doing the trust right from the get-go, right? And
right. Yeah.
wow.
Isn't that fascinating? How expensive these deeds became? Yes.
It's interesting. One of my last guests had talked about people trying to save money and do it yourself, right? And
Right.
he used an analogy like, if you're going to sell your house, very few people, unless they have a real estate background, are going to do it themselves.
Right.
You're gonna hire a professional. You're going to pay 3% or something like that, and
6.
you're 6, yeah, and you're far better off to do that and get it done than trying to, hire attorneys or other people to draft up the paperwork, make sure it's correct, your title insurance, and the list goes on and on. So, do it right the first time, have a professional help you. In the long run, it saves you a ton of money.
Exactly. You got it.
So, it's interesting. So, something else, while we're talking about trust, right? Trusts have a lot of different components to them. Obviously, they need to. One thing that's in a trust that's important is a pour over will.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know about you, our listeners. When I hear the term pour over, my mind immediately goes to a cup of coffee and something that a barista at Starbucks is doing for me behind the counter, right?
It's a great name.
Yeah, it's a pour over, right? But can you explain what a pour over will is, what it does, why it's so important, and then beyond that, what can happen if a trust doesn't contain, a pour over will? There's
Oh boy,
something missing.
do I have a story about that? Boy, do I have a story about that. But yes, a pour over will. When I describe a pour over will to my clients, again, I like to break things down in what I call 6th grade stories. So this is how I tell pour over wills. Imagine you're at the circus. You're watching the trapeze act. If everything goes right, the trapeze act is your eyes are always up on the trapeze and things are bouncing back and forth up there. You're not really focusing on the safety net unless something goes wrong and falls out. I want you to think about the pour over will as the safety net below a trust. As long as everything is funded in the trust that's supposed to be, and funding is the process of titling things in the trust that are supposed to be there. As long as you did all of that, then the trapeze works just the way it's supposed to. All eyes are on the trust. You don't even use the pour over will. It ends up being an unneeded document. But if you end up with something that maybe you found an asset you forgot about and it's of enough value that it needs to now go to probate, if you don't have the pour over will, and the pour over will simply states, any probate asset, I want to transfer the trustee of my trust to distribute under the terms of the trust. So it's really a nice safety net. But if you don't have that and you have a probate asset, then you're really left to the court saying, because the court's not going to recognize a trust. A trust is a private document that's between you and your trustee. It's a contract. The court really doesn't care about trusts unless someone's contesting it. A court doesn't use those to determine what to do with probate property. They use wills for that. The will is the letter to the probate court that tells the court how to deal with property. And so if you don't have that, you can end up with a nasty story like the one I call Something's Gone Missing. So, and this really is a story of everything that could go wrong did. But the pour over will would have been the solution that would have fixed it easily had that been a part of this plan. So I'm just going to launch right in. So about 25 years ago, Mom created a trust and nominated her most responsible daughter as her trustee and power of attorney. And Mom had a property and accounts and everything else that passed through her trust when Mom died about 15 years ago. So I want you to give that timeline a thought. That puts us right at 2008. Now, we all know what was going on in 2008. So before mom died, daughter decided that she would help mom to refinance that condo so that it was more profitable for mom. And so she pulled it out of the trust to be able to refinance it. She actually even, well, this this is another thing that went wrong. This is a fun part of the story. So daughter really didn't do the transfer correctly. Technically, when you pull a document out of a trust, it should be the trustee of the trust that's removing it. So mom really wasn't that capable at that point. So daughter did this as a POA. So it really should have been an invalid transfer out of the trust to begin with, because she signed as POA, not as trustee. So she really legally didn't have the authority to manage trust assets as a POA. But that's not the point of the story. That's just one more thing that went wrong. Daughter did write a check to the title company to transfer it back into the trust. The check was deposited, but the title company never actually put it back in the trust. So again, another thing that went wrong. So here we are, 2020 comes, and oh, well, let's go back. Sorry, I'm getting my sequence out. Back in that 2008, as you would imagine, the condo, when mom passed, couldn't sell. So many things couldn't sell, and it was a very low income condo. So they decided to continue to rent, but distributed everything else under the trust, and everything else under the trust went fine. They didn't pay attention to the fact that that this condo never went back into the trust. They really thought it was in the trust, but since it didn't sell, they just continued to rent it. Now we're back in 2020, many years later. we're 12 years after mom's death, and now the condo has an offer for sale for $60,000. Now in 2020, it's remarkable that there was a property selling that low, if you remember what was happening with properties. But here we are, the house, they have an offer for 60,000, and they realize in title that this is not held in the trust, so it can't close because it's still in mom's deceased name. Well, you can't use a POA to take care of any documents for a deceased person. POAs pretty much die with you. So I say to the client who's calling asking for help to sell this property, I say, well, I want you to look through any documents you have. You've got to find a will, a pour over will, something like that, that nominates you to be the person to handle this. And she goes through all her documents. She says, there is no will, and I never remember seeing um, anything like that when I was going through mom's documents before. Okay, no good. Well, the value of the property is significant. It's only 60,000. In Arizona, if a property is under 60,000, we don't really need a full probate. All we need to do is a small estate affidavit. And it's a little 3-page document that says this thing was in this person's name. I'm the closest person to this person. I can handle this. You submit a $279 fee to the court, and the court stamps the document and gives it back to you usually within 24 hours, saying you are the proud owner of that piece of property. Cakewalk, in and out the door. Well, it can't be that simple. Remember when I said that the trust appointed the responsible daughter? Well, there's another daughter.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if we had the pour over will would have nominated responsible daughter. We would have been able to submit that along with the small estate affidavit, and it would have been in and out the door just in the easy process I described. But we don't. We have this other daughter. Well, come to find out, nobody has seen this other daughter. So really, this title of the story could be as much something's gone missing as someone's gone missing. Nobody has seen this other daughter since mom's death. Well, we use the last known address to send documents, and they come back undeliverable, no such address. Apparently, that place doesn't even exist anymore. We do several internet searches to try and find anyone with a similar name, similar birth date, no dice. We hire a private investigator. He does all of his preliminary searches, and all of his systems show there is no such person. Now, also no obituary, but no such person. So we can't get just a simple renunciation of this other daughter to be able to sell this little $60,000 condo. So here we are. We now have to open a seriously delinquent formal probate to get a judge to appoint the daughter appointed under the trust because we can't reach the other daughter to be able to sell the $60,000 condo. Thankfully, we go through this process. It takes us about an extra 90 days. The judge does approve it and we do sell it. But let me tell you, this could have been a 3-day, $279 court process if there had been a pour over well, but there wasn't. And so, really, this could be a tag on to last week's episode about do it yourself estate planning. There are people who will go online to LegalZoom or other similar systems and do a trust and think they're done and not have any idea that they need these other documents as part of a well-rounded estate plan, like the pour over will, and they could end up in a nightmare just like this one. So the lesson is you need an attorney and you need the whole package.
Oh, absolutely. So I have to ask, do you know, did the other daughter ever resurface?
She has not ever resurfaced.
Just gone dark. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a challenge. And how easily it could have all been solved with that pour will, that safety net to catch
Yes.
anything that slips through the cracks, right?
Anything that falls out of probate falls into the safety net of the pour over will and bounces right back up to the trapeze of the trust.
Wow. So important. Say, I know we're winding down on our time. I did want to ask, is there anything else that you'd just like to share with your audience, or maybe a question I didn't ask that you're like, man, I wish you asked me that question?
Well, if I'm allowed, if you want to learn more about Arizona probate, Arizona estate planning, that book that I talked about that John introduced, the Lifeguard Your Legacy, it is a free download from my website. It is written in easy blog speak. I'd love for you to be able to grab it. I do ask for an email address to do that, but if you want to go to lifeguardinglegacies.com, it is a free download there. And I'd love for you to have that information. It's going to be helpful no matter what attorney you end up working with to do your estate plan. And I just want to reiterate whatever attorney you end up working with to do your estate plan. So it'll be helpful information.
Oh, that's awesome. And yeah, I've read the book. It's a great book. It's free, so grab a copy. So what's the best way for our listeners to get a hold of you, Heidi?
So on the website at lifeguardinglegacies.com, all over it, there's a little box that's schedule 15-minute Q&A. It's a free phone call. Very often during that call, we'll discuss pricing, process, we'll answer any of your questions. If all you had was questions, it's very often free legal advice. We'll call it free legal education because if you're not under a contract, we'll call it free legal education. But there is no charge for that. If you decide to move forward, right in that call, we'll schedule the appointment and I'll come to your house and we'll sit down and do your estate plan. The other option is if you'd rather schedule by phone, you can always use the phone number 602-529-1827. My legal assistant will schedule the same 15-minute appointment for you to talk to me. So either way, we'll get you to that same end.
And that's awesome. And what I'll do too, I'll include all of your contact information with the phone number, the link to your website where they can schedule an appointment, grab a copy of the free book. I'll put it all in the show notes. So whether if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or if you're watching this on our YouTube channel, you will be able to see all that information and reach out. Heidi, it is always a delight to spend time with you. I love our conversations. So thank you so much for being on our show today.
I am so honored. Thank you for having me.
Oh, of course. It's been eye-opening. And along with our listeners, certainly grateful for your time. A big thanks to all of you, our audience, for joining us again. And please feel free to reach out to Heidi with your questions, concerns. She is the Legacy Lifeguard, and she will help you keep your legacies above water. And as always, my friends, your life is your legacy. So plan ahead and make it a great day.